When you mention the word child predatory, most people become very uncomfortable with the topic, which they should. But ironically, child soldiers have in history been a norm throughout and accepted throughout all societies until just recently. And as you can see, the picture of the young boys posing with their military weapons depicts just how normal it actually was. A child soldier is any person under the age of 18 that has been recruited by an armed force. World War I and World War II were the first wars that the U.S. set age restrictions on. Arab terrorist groups like the Tamil Tigers, which were actually the model for Palestine, used children as suicide bombers. And the most famous offender is Iraq. And they would use young boys and sometimes women as regular troops that would clear minefields. They'd just do the wiping out for the more advanced soldiers to come in. And the picture below actually shows a 14-year-old Iranian boy who was killed in battle shortly after the picture was taken. George W. Bush in 2007 signed into international law the Child Soldier Accountability Act, where it would make it a federal crime to recruit or use soldiers under the age of 15 anywhere in the world. Now, since then, NGOs have been pushing for much more reinforcement of this law. And in 2013, at the UN General Assembly, the Arms Trade Treaty was enacted that would prevent the flow of arms to armed actors who unlawfully recruited children. So what caused these treaties to be enacted? Well, obviously, it's morally wrong to put a child into a war that they don't even understand. Children are clearly the most vulnerable members of society, and it has been found that in these military forces, these children were neglected. They endured cruelty, starvation, and even sexual violence. And this is why the NGO has proposed that children under the age of 18 cannot be recruited simply because of their physical and mental maturity. Now, obviously, a child can easily learn to pull the trigger of a gun, but can they always decipher between right and wrong? Should a child be held responsible for killing a civilian in war? And this is a war crime that they may not even understand they had committed. This is a big reason why NGOs are pushing to stop the use of child soldiers all over the world. As you can see, marked on the map, there are several countries that still use child soldiers today. This is a problem that's still plaguing our world. And you might be asking, well, if it was signed into international law, making this act illegal, how is it still happening? Quite frankly, there's several issues and flaws with enforcing this problem. And I'm going to get into that on the next slide. Most poorer countries struggle with enforcing this law, whereas countries who already recognize the rights of children follow their own laws regarding this matter. Now, the U.S. struggles to enforce in other countries because of things like rebel groups. It's really hard to control a rebel group because they don't even follow their own government. Families sometimes will send their young sons to the military for financial reasons. When streets become battlefields, forcing children to fight becomes effective and potentially will save their life. Now, there is easy access to small and cheap weapons. Some countries have more access to these weapons than to textbooks. It is easy to manipulate children who are poor to join for food insecurity. And it is an incredibly weak force because reporting to the Committee on the Rights of Children only happens every 5 years. And they also may or may not be taken seriously. Now, lastly, reported violations to the UW never replies with an explanation on what it intends to do next. So as this issue continues to grow, it does look like in the future the U.S. is trying to improve its enforcement by threats of sanctions and seeking harder to find groups that recruit children. They're also trying to press prosecution in other countries and encourage allies to also seek prosecution in their own countries and end conflicts in which children are fighting in. And on a good note, in 2014, the Special Court of Sierra Leone ruled that recruiting children soldiers is a war crime and has begun its own prosecutions. So it does seem that more and more countries are hopping on board for child's rights, though preventing the use of children by militias is a true long-term challenge.